Walk in the Cloud.
Everyone is talking cloud these days, but are they talking sense? This is Ellen Bencard with the last episode of this first series of Walk in the Cloud. We've been talking about how technologies have transformed not just businesses, but the people who run them. We started with the CEO, and we're going to wrap up with Chief Information Officers and Chief Technology Officers. How have their roles changed now that everyone else around the board table is getting involved in technology? Emma Roscoe joins me on my walk to tell us. Emma, thanks for joining us today. Now, before we dive into any specific questions, tell me a little bit about you. What are your credentials for giving advice to CIOs and CTOs?
Sure. Well, my current role, and we tend to have multiple hats within Accenture, but my current role is that I lead our cloud and infrastructure engineering practice within the UK. So that covers everything from your on-site legacy infrastructure through to our latest and greatest innovation in terms of cloud, automation, analytics, and AI, and everything else in between.
That is a big role and very relevant to what I want to talk to you about today. Let's start with a story that I hear a lot. A company moves most of its computing into the cloud, and the board looks at their tech leadership and they ask, what's next? And the CTO and the CIO reply, that's up to you. There's sort of a mismatch on who's responsible for the next step. Does this ring true to you? And if so, how can we fix this stalemate?
It's very true. Actually, it's funny. A lot more navel gazing these days in terms of who covers what role, and I think it really aligns with the trend that we're seeing. That ultimately, the role of the business and the role of the IT teams are inextricably linked. Ultimately, where I've worked with clients and where they've been most successful is when their business strategy is very much aligned and actually developed in complementary to their IT strategy. So ultimately, where we're seeing key trends is where the CTIOs, the CIOs, CTOs, whatever their label may be, need to really paint the art of the possible and describe how systems and services can support a business strategy that opens up new business models.
So, this series, and this is the last episode we're doing, this series has looked at each of those chief officers and talked about how their roles have changed. How do you think the CTOs and the CIOs can best help to get those other board members to the right place technologically?
So, I probably just highlighted it then. It's painting the art of the possible, but I think, where I see the evolution of CTO and CIO roles is that, they're no longer just managing an operations team. They're very much having to look at different targets and strategies and approaches. For example, CIO, yes, ultimately they're taking a broader picture around the technology initiatives. CTOs, look more at the systems and services, but ultimately have a customer-based view. So when we look at our clients, that customer experience, that customer view, what they will do and where they can add the most value is really bring to life actually how can technology enable that business transformation. So how can you, we talk about agile a lot, but how can you actually bring those new business models, new business services to market quicker by enabling your IT to move at a greater pace in a more agile way? And I think it's the CTIO's job to ultimately describe to the business leads how to do that and actually what technology can do to support them.
And I'm guessing that's a much more strategic role than those roles might have been 10, 15 years ago. But before we get to that, I realize I've been mashing up CTOs and CIOs here, and they are different roles. So can you just tell us, when it comes to helping organizations use cloud and other transformational technologies, how do you see those roles divide? Who is doing what?
So I think, and probably just touched on it just then. I mean, CIOs ultimately need to look at a broad view of the technology initiatives, and ultimately, not just in, I suppose, traditionally they would focus more on managing operational teams, making sure that they were meeting SLAs, etc., and delivering the kind of ongoing BAU service to the business. I think from a CIO perspective, I really see their role evolving, and their job is to look at the strategic evolution and how trends are moving on in terms of technology, and ultimately how technology can then better support them in the future. And I think it's their job to almost be, have a bit of a crystal ball in understanding how that technology is going to evolve. From a CTO perspective, again, they're looking at it more in terms, not very much from a specific technology view, but very much how the systems and services bring together. So, a lot of the trend we're seeing in terms of the full stack capabilities, where ultimately it's the customer experience of how all of those technologies and services hang together to enhance that customer experience. That's going to be the job of the CTOs who really improve that and understand how those systems and services hang together so they can get the most out of that customer experience. So that's sort of an integrated view.
And have you seen a move to cloud trigger a change in these roles? Are they more strategic than they used to be?
I would certainly say yes, absolutely more strategic. And I think, time and time again, my current client says it on a regular basis that actually not only is it the pace that they have to, the pace of what they have to keep up with on a daily basis and how technology is evolving and the capabilities that are out there, but it's also the breadth of knowledge that they have to have. So ultimately, we used to talk about jack of all trades, master of, ideally it was master of one or two. It really is very, very much a master of all trades and understanding, because those that are able to grapple and get their arms around that full breadth of capability are those that are proving most successful. I mean, we've particularly seen it in the last 12 months with COVID. Those that have had the most innovative solutions that have taken advantage of the technology that can enhance their business models are the ones that have come out top.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean that this broadening given us a broadening of the type of people we see doing these roles? I mean, I've been in the industry for a while, and big corporate tech departments have not traditionally been known for their diversity.
So it's, I believe, yes. I mean, it's interesting. Now, I had, when I joined Accenture, actually, some of the best technology or technical adept people were actually those that had a Roman history degree and a lady that had done French and something, and ideally not the, ironically, not the sort of STEM-based subjects, and yet they were the ones that seemed to apply the logic most appropriately. And I think what we're seeing now is that, yes, absolutely, STEM-based capabilities and people are looking at that, but, ultimately, I think I mentioned at the beginning, it's a business transformation, and therefore the skills required to understand how you enable a business transformation are not just technical skills, it's the people, it's the process, that whole traditional model of how it pulls together. And therefore, ultimately, it isn't just the deep core technical skills that we're seeing need to evolve. It's all of the people, the operating model, the process that enables that. Ultimately, the business change is probably the most fundamental part of all of it.
Emma, data and analytics gets talked about so much now as an integral part of these roles. Any thoughts on that?
So I think, we've talked very much around the fact that actually the technology strategy and the business strategy needs to be interlinked, and ultimately the role of the CTIO these days is to paint the art of the possible for their business peers. And I think that extends to both data and innovation and the analytics around data, because ultimately, if we look at the majority of the businesses that we work with, their most valuable asset is the data. And being able to unlock the business value that data can provide is probably most critical to the business strategy. And therefore, looking at ways that they can do that through analytics is key. So I think, we've moved and evolved through a time when actually it was very much just focused on the technology. And I think, we've talked about full stack up through the services to enable the customer experience. It's technology, it's data, and it's the process and people that sit around that all together that are quite critical. So I think ultimately, again, master of all trades, the CTIOs need to be on top of the data just as much as the technology and everything else in their remit.
So, Emma, your final question, let's return to the big picture. If you can think about the CTOs and the CIOs that you've worked with over the past year or two, give us 3 things that you've seen them do that you think are lessons that people could learn from.
I would say, and it's an interesting question actually, because, obviously business transformation and the business strategy needs to be fundamentally at the heart. So I'd certainly say, number one, ultimately your CTIO, CIO, CTO needs to have the business strategy at the heart of what they evolve as their own IT strategy and understand how that tech will evolve to support that business strategy. The parts that I find interesting, and again, what we're seeing become more a predominant part of the agenda for CIOs and CTOs, is very much a sustainability agenda as well. And so, interestingly, over the last 12 months, I've seen that creep into more and more conversations that I have. It can be as sort of, very specific as a green cloud conversation, but also, expand to the wider sustainability agenda items that we are starting to discuss and see discussed in the wider market. So I'd say sustainability, I think, differentiates, and I think it's something that the boards of businesses are going to expect more and more and be more and more reliant on CIOs and CTOs to support them with that. And then a third. I think the measurement. So I think ultimately tying in those 2 first things, the way that CIOs and CTOs are measured is going to change, and ultimately those that understand that and are able to translate, I think I mentioned the customer experience before, but translating that net promoter score from a customer base and translating that through to their matching to the technical measures that they measure their systems on. So ultimately it's one seamless sort of measurement across the board. I think CTOs and CIOs that actually are able to do that and inextricably link those measures, and therefore understand what really makes a negative impact on customer experience versus those that make a positive impact, the detractors, etc., versus the promoters. They're the ones that are really going to be successful.
Thank you, Emma, for joining us today, and hope we talk to you again soon. CTOs, CIOs, and those on their career path can check out Emma on LinkedIn or keep an eye on their favorite Accenture channels for more advice and insight. We're going to take a brief break from Walking in the Clouds as we work on the next series for you. When we return, we'll be looking at the world of partnerships between companies, sometimes obvious and sometimes unexpected, that create new products, services, and opportunities in the cloud that none of them could have managed on their own. Don't worry, no marketing waffle here. We'll be digging into the success stories themselves to discover why they worked and how others can learn from them. I hope you'll join me when we return in the autumn.
Walk in the Cloud.